Hello again, and welcome back to year 3 of the Religious Education Initiative. This is week 52, the last week of the year for us, and this is day 1. So, last time we saw Esther finally make her petition, asking the king to deliver her and her people from Haman's plot, and naming Haman as the great enemy of their safety. In anger, the king commanded that Haman be hung on the gallows that he had previously prepared for Mordecai. At Esther's request, he then sent a new edict throughout his empire, giving the Jews permission to defend themselves against their enemies, and requiring his officials to assist and support them in this. This end, we will finish the book of Esther and see what the end of the matter will be. So about the letter that he sent, a copy of the writ was to be issued as a decree in every province and published to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take revenge on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift royal steeds, hurried out, urged by the king's command. The decree was issued in the citadel of Susa. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king, wearing royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a mantle of fine linen and purple, while the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and gladness, joy and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict came, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a festival and a holiday. Furthermore, many of the peoples of the country professed to be Jews, because the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. Now, in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power over them, but which had been changed to a day when the Jews would gain power over their foes, the Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who had sought their ruin, and no one could withstand them, because the fear of them had fallen upon all peoples. All the officials of the provinces, the satraps and the governors and the royal officials were supporting the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was powerful in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, as the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. So the Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, slaughtering and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 people. They killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Paramashta, Arisai, Aridai, Vaizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not touch the plunder. That very day the number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, "In the citadel of Susa the Jews have killed 500 people, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled." Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 persons in Susa, but they did not touch the plunder. Now, the other Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to defend their lives, and gained relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they laid no hands on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested, and made that day a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th, and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who live in the open towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, a holiday on which they send gifts of food to one another. Mordecai recorded these things, and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, enjoining them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and also the 15th day of the same month, year by year, as the day on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and presents to the poor. So the Jews adopted as a custom what they had begun to do, as Mordecai had written to them. Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he gave orders in writing that the wicked plot that he had devised against the Jews should come upon his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore these days are called Purim, from the word pur. Thus, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews established and accepted as a custom for themselves and their descendants and all who joined them, that without fail they would continue to observe these 2 days every year, as it was written and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every family, province, and city. And these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with the Jew Mordecai, gave full written authority confirming this second letter about Purim. Letters were sent wishing peace and security to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, and giving orders that these days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons. As the Jew Mordecai and Queen Esther enjoined on the Jews, just as they had laid down for themselves and for their descendants regulations concerning their fasts and their lamentations. The command of Queen Esther fixed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. So, as we said at the beginning, this is a very different voice in which the story is written. It's written, as it seems, in the archival voice of the kingdom of Persia, with the addition of the very intimate, very immediate text of the prayers and the letters, which gives a still greater glimpse of the world of the Jews in exile around the ancient Near East at the time of the kingdom of the Persians. So, we must remember, as we said before, that at this time the temple had been rebuilt, and many Jews had returned to Jerusalem to live there and to rebuild the temple and to reestablish their communal life in the Promised Land. So they too were at risk, and they too were saved through the faithfulness and obedience of Queen Esther and of Mordecai. What I want to point out instead, though, at a little bit more length, is that strange little piece of trivia that after they had killed those who had plotted against them throughout Susa and throughout the empire of the Persians, the Jews did not touch any of the plunder. And we need to pay close attention to this, because it tells us something about their faithfulness, and it tells us about what they understood themselves to be doing. That the enemies of God, which is to say, the same people that had inhabited Canaan, the same people that had been attacking them for years, the Amalekites, yes, but those who had set themselves completely against God, which is to say, the demons, the fallen angels, and all the human beings who had allied themselves with them. They understood these to be their enemies. It wasn't simply a matter of jealousy. It wasn't a matter of simple, we might say, racism. This is a matter of the determination of the enemies of God to destroy his people, the people that he had called by his name, called from the midst of the Gentiles. And therefore, as they resist this, as they fight against it, they understand themselves to be under God's command to destroy these enemies of God as being under the ban, in the same way as they destroyed the evil Canaanites, not touching any of the plunder, but leaving it all to God. In the same way, they are refusing to enrich themselves from the downfall of their enemies. They destroy them, but they leave the wealth to God to dispose of. And in this we see they are not doing this out of a bloodthirstiness. They are not doing this out of greed. They're not doing this out of any desire to advance themselves. They are doing this as God's instrument of judgment on those who have dared to come against him and to seek to destroy and undo his work and his purpose in the world. If this had been successful, then all of the descendants of Abraham, all of the descendants of Jacob, would have been destroyed. That includes the ancestry of our Lord Jesus Christ, and all of the apostles and all of the faithful, all the people that we see in the New Testament would have been destroyed if Haman's plot had gone through. So God is sustaining and protecting his purpose, his plan for our salvation, but he does it through the faithfulness of Queen Esther and of Mordecai and of all the Jews who rose to defend themselves but did not take any of the spoils, counting themselves as God's instruments of judgment in this case. So I think that's important. This is not just bloodthirstiness or violence. This is God's judgment on his enemies. So with that, we'll wrap up for... one more thing, I guess. This is what was supposed to happen when King Saul was sent against the Amalekites. But King Saul didn't do it. So instead his relatives, because they're from the same tribe, Mordecai and Esther of the tribe of Benjamin, they are left to fulfill and complete this preservation of God's people through the destruction of his enemies many generations later. And that's a neat closure to a loop that I didn't even realize was open before this read. So with that, we wrap up this reading. We're almost done with this year 3, just 2 more readings for the rest of the week, and then we start over again with year 4. So God bless you all. See you for day 2.